Hello, everyone. This is Gary Case. I'll be your presenter today. Welcome to Pink Elephants webinar. Today's topic is going to be release, deployment and change control according to ITIL. Oh my, man, there's been some changes with ITIL 4. So we want to get into this and we want to start talking about what are some of those changes that are going to impact us. So we'll talk about the purpose of each practice, and then we'll also get into the service value chain activities. And we're only going to talk about three primarily activities within the 6 activities of the service value chain. And then we'll end up talking a little bit more about the whole integration between the 3 practices of release, deployment, and change control, and those 3 service value chain activities that we have to take a look at all the time. It's like anything with ITIL. ITIL provides guidance, and you have to take the framework, adopt it, adapt it, and use it, and make it fit for purpose for what you need to support your overall strategies, goals, and objectives that you want to accomplish. So as we go through here, just keep that in mind, because I'll give you all of the kind of options that we're going to be talking about that you could actually set up and do around the 3 practices, and also around the 3 of those 6 activities that we're going to focus on. So we'll start off with the purpose statement for each one of the practices. So the very first purpose statement is around change control. And if you notice, they have the word maximize the number of successful IT changes. So they're really saying that as a service provider organization, we've got to be able to handle a large volume of changes that could be coming our way. But we have to do it by being successful also, and making sure that we have risks have properly been assessed. We have the proper authorities who are authorizing the changes to proceed, and then also how do we go about and manage that change schedule so we're ensuring that there's not going to be any change conflicts or dependencies that we need to be aware of, or even resource capacity and availability is what we would also be looking at that schedule for. So the key here, in my mind, is really from a change control perspective, and they've changed the wording, so this is no longer change management where you're managing a life cycle. You're basically controlling what changes are going to go into the production environment, or even if a different environment if you've already implemented ITIL to that level. But again, it's maximizing the number of successful changes. Then we take a look at release management. Now this is net new because they separated release from release management and deployment management. And they're 2 separate practices now is what they're looking for. And so when we go through and we think about release management, this is making new and changed services and features available for use. And so that means that we're actually turning on the features, we're turning on the functions, we're making everything available that the business can go on ahead and take advantage of that particular release. Then when we look at this here of deployment management, all of a sudden now what they're saying is that we move new or changed hardware, software, it could be documentation, processes, or anything that we're going to have into the live production environment. So that means we're deploying into the production environment, but it's not being turned on. So in other words, nobody can use it at this point in time. So you would have to go through and make sure that you are always, using release management in conjunction with deployment management also. And I want to talk a little bit about this because this is a key aspect, and you may step back and say, well, why did they make these decisions around deployment, that we move it to the production environment, and release is about now turning it on and making it available for use. All of this is to support other parts of the activities we're going to talk about here, primarily obtain or build is going to be one of the key activities, but it's supporting new practices that the industry has adopted over the years. So supporting Agile and DevOps as part of project management besides just waterfall projects that are being done, and they've actually separated out these two. So when we look at this, your traditional waterfall that many organizations have done for many, many, many years, everything starts with the release plan. That will never change. You always have to plan what you're going to be doing. Then your actual release or change, whether again hardware, software, documentation, whatever, that typically gets deployed and released always at the same time is in most organizations when they're doing true waterfall release management. And then at the end, of course, you always do a review, which is always good practice. When we talk about today's world with organizations that have adopted Agile and DevOps practices, again, it's a little different. We start always with the release plan. We have, again, that changed hardware, software, documentation, but we deploy that first. So we move it into the production environment. And again, this helps support, especially in DevOps, where everything is automated, including deployment that is going into the production environment. Then after we do the deployment into production, then we typically would have release management then is making a decision of when do they want to turn on the features and functionality so that the actual customers can start using and taking advantage of that particular release that was out there. Now at Pink, we like to talk about deploy is an IT decision. We can deploy all the time. You can have continual deployment happening all the time into the production environment. We move it in, we move it in, we move it in, but it's not turned on so people can use it at this point in time. Now, release management, though, should be a a business decision. It's the business who now says we are ready to use this. We've had our training, we've got the communications, everybody's aware of it, and the business is now saying turn it on so we can start using it. Okay? And then you also have the review at the end. So again, when ITIL 4, they're looked at and they says there's been a lot of changes in our industry since they did their last release of 2011, and that's where a lot of ITIL 4 is to support all these new practices and ways of doing business that we have to take a look at that is out there. So as we go through, then we want to talk about the service value chain activities. And when we get into this activities around the service value chain, it is all about how do we take the opportunity or demand, and within those 6 activities, how do we transform those opportunities or demand into and through our products and services in order to have value realization from our business customers that are out there. So a couple key things that have happened with ITIL 4. So you can start seeing that there's the double arrows between opportunity or demand and the kind of the figure in the middle there that has those 6 activities, as well as the double arrows around between the value and those same, that diagram. And 2 things that happen with those double arrows is, one, ITIL 4 is all about co-creation. So it's about value creation is what we're working with the business on, as well as a service provider in a very collaborative approach. It's a 50-50 proposition that they work together. Also, those double arrows that you see is also a sign for feedback, because that's one of the key things is having not only collaboration, but collaboration with feedback. And again, that supports a lot of the work that is done through Agile, Lean, and DevOps also. And the arrows you see coming out of value at the bottom that goes up to opportunity or demand is, again, feedback, but also it's a sign that we may be increasing our demand, especially when we do good work out there, and businesses want to take more advantage of the services that we do have to offer. So we're going to talk about primarily 3 of these key activities within the service value chain. The design and transition will be one of those, and you may recognize those two names from ITIL version 3. Then we'll talk about obtain or build, and also deliver and support. But I want to come back and talk a little bit about obtain or build, because the obtain has been around. In version 3, it was called supplier management. And so we always had a process as a part of version 3, and you still have it as a practice in ITIL 4 of supplier management, that we can obtain things, we can go buy it. The build piece is net new to ITIL. ITIL has never, ever had any part of the build activities, the development activities. It has always talked about primarily application management, but not application development. Now, all of a sudden, as a part of ITIL 4, we have 34 practices, and some of those practices are called like project management. And that's part of that build that we work with them. And within project management, they have waterfall, they have Agile, they've got DevOps. They also have another practice called software development and management. We've got business analysis that's going to be out there. So there's a lot of things that they're talking about that has not been a part of ITIL in the past. That is absolutely wonderful to see that being a key area there. So we'll talk about those three areas in the cube there, but also want to talk just a little bit, because you're going to see coming up here when I start talking about the integration of the three core practices that we introduced as release, deployment, and change control, how they interact within the three key activities. But you're going to see a fourth one also come in, that is the engage, because the engage is when we're having communications. It's whether it's going to be business requirements, that's going to be key, or we're getting business sign-off that they are ready for the release to go live. So they're giving us that information. So engage is one of those that's going to be a part of both release as well as deployment management when we're having those discussions. And I could even argue as much as change control of where that really fits in. So I'm not saying that plan up at the top there that you see is an activity that is critical. I'm not saying it's not, but it's going to have less of an emphasis around what we do on a daily basis, because that's what I want to talk about, is what we do within these 6 activities and what really happens on a daily basis. The service value chain is really, I refer to it as a flexible operating model. It really is the way we do our work today. And it's flexible based upon what you put in place, what decisions you make about adapting ITIL, about your practices of whether you're straight waterfall, you're moving into Agile, moving into DevOps, or groups are doing that across the enterprise. These are all things that you have to take into consideration. So plan does play a part, because they're going to get their input from governance primarily, which is a part of the bigger perspective called the service value system, which the service value chain is a part of the service value system. But they get the plans that they put together from that input comes from governance, and then their output is really strategic plans, tactical plans, and operational plans that the rest of the service value chain activities have to follow. Therefore, it'll provide guidance on what we do, whether we choose to use waterfall, Agile, DevOps, because they're getting feedback and input into it from the governance practice. When we talk about improve, of course, everything we want to do is about improving. And here, when we see improve down here as a part of the service value chain, we're not only improving those 6 activities, because improve has to improve its own practice, but it's also improving our products and our services that we have as key elements that we take a look at. So when we think about this service value chain, it really is the way we work today. It allows us to be very flexible with our choices of how we're going to be working. It allows us to go on ahead and be able to, make the right decisions, to be able to respond to business needs, business requirements. Those are all key things that we really have to take a look at. And when we talk about value, because that's probably the number one word, not only in ITIL 4, but in many of the methods and techniques and practices that are already out there. And three characteristics of value is really around quality. So how do we ensure a higher level of quality? How do we ensure that we reduce the number of defects? We have first time right, aim for perfection. We have quality at the source. So in other words, this is where Agile and DevOps comes in, is through our initial feedback. We fail faster, so you shift left for failure. You don't fail in production, you fail in dev, you fail in testing, and you fix this always so that you're moving forward, so we do not promote defects. Quality is a key characteristic that customers are always looking for and they will continue to look for that quality. The next is speed. Speed is all about how fast can we get to market. So time to market, you could say, is one of those. They want quicker delivery. They want to make sure that they have the proper cadence in order to be able to meet the business needs and outcomes that they really want to achieve, which means that we've got to handle more changes and do it much faster. And that is therefore, such as Agile with your sprints, you could have a 1 to 4 week sprint. And at the end of each one of those sprints, you could have something that is deployable, and we can deploy it. But remember, just because we deployed it, it doesn't mean it's available for use. That's release management making those decisions. So again, the service value chain does a great job of pulling this all together. It's a great flexible operating model. It's indicative of how we do our work today. And this is where you're going to see your multiple value streams coming across the, to be able to create that value ultimately. And we do that through our products and our services that are out there. All right, so I want to spend a little bit of time now kind of going through and talking about the activities here. So design and transition, they talk about is to ensure that products and services, so those are two key words, is we're looking at the end-to-end services is what we're really looking for, and products are simply just a configuration of our resources that we put together that is going to be out there, because our main vehicle or mechanism for value delivery is through our services. But they talk about also continually meet stakeholder expectations for quality, costs, and time to market. That's those three areas there are the characteristics of value that I just talked about. Then we also have, as we get into this, the purpose of the obtain or build. This now is not about end-to-end services, but these are to ensure that our service components, so in other words, those components that make up your services, your servers, your network, your application, etc., that they are available when and where they are needed, and they meet the agreed upon specifications. So again, they're going to be working very closely with design and transition, because the engage process is going to do the business requirement gathering. The output of that is going to be given into design and transition. Design is going to design the specs and everything and hand that off to obtain or build. And then after obtain or build, you'll see there's a number of things that can happen here, because this is where it gets interesting with deployment and release management being separated, and whether you're in Agile, DevOps, or you're in a waterfall environment, you could have different approaches of what you're going to be looking for. Then we get into deliver and support. Now, most people are going to say, well, why are we talking about deliver and support when we're talking about change control, release, and deployment? And there is a valid answer, and I'll get to that here pretty soon. But what deliver and support is all about is to ensure that services are delivered, again, that end to end, and supported according, again, to the agreed upon specifications. So that has been gathered already, and, stakeholders' expectations. Now, the word deliver is an interesting word. It can be used two different ways in this particular scenario. One is we could deliver something to our customer. So we could deliver a desktop, a laptop. We deliver something to them. But the word deliver is also, it's what we do on a day-to-day basis. We deliver our services. We're running our services. We're managing our services all the time. So we're continually are delivering the capability for our business to generate, what their outcomes are that they need to achieve. Whether it's a for-profit business or a not-for-profit business, it doesn't matter. It is just simply we are delivering the services that get consumed by our business and customers that are out there in order for them to achieve, again, their results and outcomes that they want to achieve. So then, as we get into, let's talk about these three practices of change control and, release and deployment, and how does that fit in to the service value chain activities from an integrated perspective. And again, we're not going to talk about plan and improve, and you'll just see a little bit about engage here, and I've already kind of talked about that. So when we look at change control, you're going to find, of course, that change control is going to be a big part of design and transition. And when you think about that, because again, we have to transition something into the production environment. So it may not be so much engaged, in the design stage of that, but definitely once the work has been designed and it's been built, and it could come back then into transition, change control is going to play a very big part of that. Now, as part of Engage, when we start talking about change control, you'll see I have that highlighted around Engage also. That is because there may be conversations with the business around the change. Before we transition, there could be training engaged, with the business. There could be knowledge transfer that would have to be taking place with the business. So that would be all part of change control. Now, when we look at change control with obtain or build, this is primarily more around the build piece. And this is where many organizations are actually, as part of the build, this is where they're adopting Agile, they're adopting, DevOps, and they have to follow change control also. But what happens here is that because of the levels of authority, the way change control talks about that, they say it's a person or a group. That's all the guidance that is given at the foundation level, that they can be the ones to review, assess, and approve certain types of changes. And so therefore, in the build phase, if it's Agile, it could actually be the Scrum Master who has that level of authority that they can go on ahead and approve that, or it could be someone else representing that aspect. Could be a product owner who is doing that. So again, depending on how you put this in place, you can have change control still being followed, but it's all done within the build piece that they're putting in place. They're following the process. I believe, and this is just Gary speaking now, but I honestly believe that as organizations are moving more towards Agile and DevOps, that I honestly believe a minimum of 70 to 80% of all changes will become more standard pre-approved changes. That's because we're working with a smaller scope with the sprint. We have product owner engaged and doing the product backlog. We do our sprint planning. We have iterative feedback. We have, the minimal viable product defined. A definition of done is defined. We do a review, a sprint review with the customer to demo. Then we do a sprint retrospective after we've done the sprint. And so again, you're looking at something much smaller when you're thinking in terms of scoping as opposed to a 6 to 8 to 12-month project. And it's been proven time over time that you increase the speed to deliver. You can also, at the same point, when you're doing it correctly, increase your quality. So I actually see that these become even more standard pre-approved changes that we have to take a look at. So you have change control as a part of the design and transition, as a part of the obtain or build, primarily the build, and with design and transition, it's primarily the transition. The engage is going to be a part of it, but then also when we look at this deliver and support, remember ITIL says that standard changes can be done and executed in the form of requests. So that means that our standard way of delivering and supporting our customers and users out there is that users can make a request and it would be a natural standard pre-approved change. It is still, though, part of the change control process that they have to look at that, because my take is always that if a standard change starts failing, it can no longer be a standard change. So it has to be backed out into more of the normal change aspect. Because with change control, they still look at the three types of changes. You have normal, but those normals can have low, medium, or high risk. They have emergency changes, and they have those standard changes that they all take a look at. So change control here does play a big part. Then you get into deployment management. And you're going to find deployment management is really going to be a part of transition again. Quite often organizations that still want to follow that aspect of it, more waterfall, but they still want to have the control as a part of transition. That's fine. But you also have obtain or build deployment management. The same concept is that they can actually, because remember deployment is an IT, that's the way we look at it at Pink, decision, and remember even in DevOps they had automated deployment because they automate basically everything they can, included deployment. So that means it's automated, it goes out into the production environment, however it is just not turned on. And then deployment also, depending on what you want to do here, there can be a part of engage as we go through, and if we need to provide notification to our customers or anything like that, any kind of conversations that are taking place is really part of that engage, especially when the conversations are going back and forth. So deployment would be around these primary areas and not so much deliver and support when they're talking about moving something into the production environment. Now, I suppose people could argue and say, well, wait a minute, we can do a push where we push it out to a server and users can then download that, and you could argue that that's a form of deployment also. So perhaps deployment can also deal with the deliver and support. But remember, when we're pushing it out and it can be pulled down immediately by the users, now we've missed the release piece. So that's why I don't have it in here. But organizations are going to interpret, which they should, ITIL's guidance, what works best for them, and follow suit with what you want to do. So then we get into release management. So remember, release is where now we make it actually available for people to be using. And so again, the transition would be a big part that we're going to have that release decision that is going to be made. We turn it on. And even if you're doing waterfall, remember, you're going to have release and deployment probably both happening as a part of design and transition. You're going to have release management also can be a part of the obtain or build. Again, the primary would be around the build, and that is if you would have the customer, i.e. the product owner, who is representing the business, that if they would be the ones to make a decision to say, yes, we are willing to release that, it could actually be a part of obtain or build also. Now, some organizations are not going to want to do that. They would have that done more through engage because, again, we have to engage with our customers, and they have to tell us when they are ready for this release to, be made available to the end users that are out there. So as you go through and you look at all of this, you can see that there's many ways. This is why it's called a flexible model. It's based upon what you need to do in your organization to meet the value characteristics of quality, speed, and the third piece that I don't think I mentioned, come to think of it, is cost. because if you increase quality and you actually deliver speed and you do both of those well, and you're not promoting defects or anything like that, then you're actually going on ahead and reducing costs of delivering our services. So it really becomes a win-win-win. Wasn't that long ago when we were given those three areas of quality, speed, and cost, we'd say, which of the two do you want? Nowadays, we can deliver all three. But there's a difference between saying we do this and you actually do it. So when you look at the big picture, it just pulls everything together that is out there. It's not going to be the same picture for every organization. And in fact, I'd be very disappointed if it was the same picture for every organization, because you have to fit for purpose when you're designing what you want to be doing, but always think in terms of the customers, the value perspective, and the value realization, and what those customers' needs and requirements really are is going to be a big driver. So with that, I just have a couple follow-up slides here. So I just want to call your attention to, we do have our summer sale. It is ending July 31st. What a great way to save some money and get some great learning that's going to be out there, and virtual courses that are instructor led is a great way. Self-paced also is great, perfect. And so go through, and you can either go to our website, find out more information, or just simply give us a call. We would be very happy to help you. Pink Forum is coming up also August 18th through the 20th. If you've never experienced Scottsdale in August, it's actually a wonderful time to be there. This is a great resort that we are going to. And again, it's last call for Pink Forum 19. It is coming up. We got a lot of sessions and around ITIL 4, but it's more advanced type sessions. It's not at the foundational level. Plus, we have the other half of the program focused around, leadership aspects, etc., that we want to think in terms of. So again, it gives you a unique opportunity. It's a much smaller event by design than our February conferences, and it'll talk about a lot of different models and frameworks that we have to take a look at. And a key part of ITIL 4 is incorporating, as I mentioned earlier, not only ITIL, but Lean. You have to take a look at DevOps and Agile, because it truly is an integrated framework. And so with that, I may be a couple minutes over. I apologize for that. And I just want to thank everyone. I hope you have found this to be somewhat beneficial. There is not a recipe of the right way to do it for every organization that is out there. So again, make sure you know what your business needs, strategies, goals, objectives, requirements, all of those are, and structure from your service provider perspective of what's going to be the best fit of how you look at the service value chain, the practices that go into it, primarily around change, release, and change control, release, and deployment that is out there. But they're just a few of the 34 total practices that we have to take a look at. Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.